Hello, everyone. How are you today? Hope you're doing well. Nice to have you here. Another Thursday. Hi, Gary. All right, we'll get started in a minute. Nice to have you here. Hello, happy Thursday for our 17th session together. So that means that it's been 18 weeks since Safer at Home began, because we missed 1 week because I did a funeral a few weeks ago. So kind of crazy. 18 weeks. Hi. Life. Let's pray for more life. We need vitality on all levels these days, don't we? So today, I'm excited to continue the narrative that we started last week, even though they are separate yet connected. So we're going to get into that in a minute. But of course, first, Zoom protocol, as you see on the bottom of your screen, if you're on the Zoom platform today, you have the chat function, you have the Q&A function, and you have under participants the possibility of raising your hand. So I'll begin, I'll do my shtick, we'll learn a little together, and then of course I'll open it up for all of you at that point. And over the course of this, feel free to, if you have a specific question, to add it to the Q&A. You can chat either with one another. I'm not going to be able to pay as close attention to the chat as I'm teaching until I get to the Q&A section. So just keep that in mind, but feel free to put up questions or comments. And then of course, we'll open it up for your thoughts and perspectives. So let's do the blessing to engage in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher krishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for giving us this opportunity to engage in the study of Torah together. Amen. Okay, last week, we looked at a story of Hillel and Shammai. We were talking about what do you do when you are approached by someone who is very foolish or argumentative or who is coming after you and trolling you for no reason. And after that story, we continue with three more little narratives about Hillel and Shammai. And this time they're approached not by two guys who are placing a bet and trying to annoy one of the rabbis. In this case, three people who want to convert to Judaism. It's not really clear if they're going about it for the right reasons or not. We don't really know, but we do see a striking difference between how Shammai responds. Striking is a key word that you will see makes sense when we look at how Shammai responds to these people. A striking difference between Shammai and Hillel in the response to these three people who want to learn more about Judaism or who want to convert. So we're going to read through all three of these stories, and then we're going to go back. The middle one is the most famous, right? It's the one that as soon as you read it, if you haven't already looked at the source sheet already, it's the one that Hillel says, well, while on one foot, what is the entire Torah? So what I want you to be thinking about as we read through this today, number one, how do we differentiate Hillel and Shammai's responses, not just on the base level, because it's very clear that they respond differently to these three people, but really what's the Talmud trying to teach us about the different ways in which they respond. And then I do want us to think about, and I want you to think about Hillel's famous statement. What does it mean to you? How is it different from the golden rule, which comes from the Christian tradition? And is there a difference in your mind between these two? And what are we supposed to learn from that? And how do you feel about the entire Torah being distilled into one statement? And what is that statement supposed to teach us? And how then can we relate that to our lives? All these are the things for you to think about today. All right, so we will read through it. I'll read through the whole thing first, and then we'll go back and look at it together. Okay, here we go. Shabbat 31a. Last week we were at the earlier section of this, Shabbat 30b. Our rabbis taught, a certain non-Jew once came before Shammai and asked him, "How many Torahs do you have?" "Two," he replied, "the written Torah and the oral Torah." "I believe you with respect to the written, but not with respect to the oral Torah. Make me a convert on condition that you teach me the written Torah only." But he scolded and repulsed him in anger. When he went before Hillel, he accepted him as a convert. On the first day, he taught him Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. The following day, he reversed them to him. "But yesterday you did not teach them to me thus," he protested. "Must you then not rely upon me? Then rely upon me with respect to the oral Torah too." On another occasion, it happened that a certain non-Jew came before Shammai and said to him, "Make me a convert on condition that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot." Thereupon he repulsed him with the builder's cubit that was in his hand. When he went before Hillel, he said to him, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. Do not to your neighbor do." That is the whole Torah. The rest is the commentary. Go and learn it. That's the famous line. On another occasion, it happened that a certain non-Jew was passing before a Beit Midrash, behind a Beit Midrash, when he heard the voice of a teacher reciting, "And these are the garments which they shall make, a breastplate and an ephod." He said, "For whom are these?" "For the high priest," he was told. Then the non-Jew said to him, "I will go and become a convert, that I may be appointed a high priest." So he went before Shammai and said to him, "Make me a convert on condition that you appoint me a high priest." But he repulsed him with the builder's cubit, which was in his hand. He then went before Hillel, who made him a convert. He said to him, "Can any man be made a king but he who knows the arts of government? Go and study the arts of government." He went and read. When he came to, "And the stranger that comes near the sanctuary shall be put to death," he asked him, "To whom does this verse apply?" "Even to King David of Israel," was the answer. Thereupon that convert reasoned with himself, a fortiori, if Israel, who are called sons of the Omnipresent, and who in his love for them he designated them, "Israel is my son, my firstborn," yet it is written of them, "And the stranger that comes near shall be put to death," how much more so a mere convert who comes with his staff and wallet? Then he went before Shammai and said to him, "Am I then eligible to be a high priest? Is it not written in the Torah, 'And the stranger that comes near shall be put to death'?" He went before Hillel and said to him, "O gentle Hillel, blessings rest on your head for bringing me under the wings of the Shekhinah." Sometime later, the three met in one place. They said, "Shammai's impatience sought to drive us from the world, but Hillel's gentleness brought us under the wings of the Shekhinah." That's the whole story. Okay? So we have here Hillel and Shammai. We have these three characters. We have three different stories. You can also think about, are these stories linked? Are they supposed to represent three very different scenarios? Are they, what is the focus of each one of them? Maybe we'll get and delve into that or not. But again, we have at the very end this idea that the Talmud clearly sets up the difference between Shammai and Hillel, that Shammai's impatience was an attempt to drive these people from the world, and yet Hillel's gentleness is what brought them under the wings of God, of the Shekhinah. So that's clearly the thesis and the tagline. But clearly there's a lot more depth to this. So I really want us to go back. I'm going to spend less time on the first and the third story, and I really want us to get into that second one, and I really want your input on that as well. So we're really going to get to that pretty quickly. So I'm just going to share one more time. We'll go back to the beginning and just walk through it quickly. The first story, we have Shammai, who is approached by this man who talks about these Torahs. "How many Torahs do you have?" And he replies, "The written and the oral Torah." Just a reminder for everyone, the written Torah, of course, is the 5 books of Moses. The oral Torah is considered the Talmud, the Mishnah, all the rabbinic writings that were not given at Mount Sinai. But in our tradition, both are considered Torah, and traditionally, both were given at Mount Sinai. The written and the oral Torah were given at the same time. That can be a whole other discussion. And this guy responds and says, "Okay, I understand. It's actually a pretty, I guess it'd be a pretty liberal view, right? I believe that there's a written Torah. I understand the significance of that. But respect for the oral Torah, not as important." Which, if you think about Reform Judaism and many of the liberal strands of Judaism, there has traditionally been more emphasis placed on the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses. If you think about Torah study and the fact that so many synagogues have Torah study, the focus is primarily, if not exclusively, on the 5 books of Moses, on the Torah itself. Very little time is spent on Mishnah and Talmud. That's another reason why I love doing this, right? This is Torah study. This is oral Torah study. And this, I think, and just on right now, what I'm thinking is how important it is that liberal Jews also are spending time doing what you're doing with me right now, which is studying Talmud, studying the oral Torah, because there's so much depth and breadth that we find outside of those 5 books of Moses. So this guy is saying, I don't care so much about the rabbinic writings, just let's focus on the Torah itself, okay? And Shammai doesn't accept that, repulses him with anger, pushes him away. And this man comes before Hillel, who accepts him as a convert. Already, we have a really important statement. This is not the traditional way in which you understand conversion, right? Conversion, someone comes, according to our tradition, 3 times, has to be rejected a few times before accepted as a convert, to go through a year of learning, to study, to learn all of these things. Here, Hillel has a very liberal way in which he is accepting people under the wings of Shekhinah and making them Jews, right? He's automatically accepting this man as a convert right away, despite the question where this man is saying, I want you to limit the amount of work that I have to do. I want just the basics, and I want just this layer of Judaism. And Hillel says, great, let's do it. So, and he starts at the very, very beginning. Hillel teaches him Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, starting with the most basic things, accepting him into the tradition and teaching him the most basic elements of Hebrew and Judaism. And the following day, he reversed them and did it backwards. And so the man says, but yesterday you didn't teach them this way. But then then Hillel says, must you then not rely upon me? Then rely upon me with respect to the oral Torah too. In other words, he uses this as an opportunity to teach this man that you can't divide and divorce the written Torah from the oral Torah. Both of them are important. Just as you rely on me to teach you the Aleph Bet in a certain way, you need to rely on me to help you recognize that Judaism is bigger than just the written Torah, that there is a complexity to this tradition. But he does it in such a nice, beautiful way, right? Where he's speaking to this man and teaches him, has a pedagogic way in which he teaches this person the beauty of a holistic Judaism. Okay, very different than Shammai. So already we have this idea that I think the Talmud is teaching us about. If you are trying to help someone along in a process, not only can you not beat them back, but if you can try to teach them through language that they can understand, or through actions, right? It's the little minute actions that Hillel does with this man to help him understand a much broader concept. Okay, so Hillel is a great teacher here. So here is, I think, really about what does it mean to teach someone. Okay, next occasion. This is a famous one. On another occasion, it happened that a certain non-Jew came before Shammai and said to him, make me a convert on condition that you teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. A ridiculous thing, right? Of course, one would assume. If someone came and said, I want you to teach me all of American law on one foot, of course you can't do that, right? It's ridiculous. Well, why would someone even assume that's possible? So of course, Shammai thinks this is ridiculous and literally beats the man back with the builder's cubit that he has in his hand. And this, of course, is a reminder that back then, rabbis weren't just rabbis in synagogues and weren't paid by the synagogues in the same way that it exists in our system today. They had other jobs. And so you can assume Shammai was doing other work. And he beats this man back because it's a ridiculous claim. And so the man comes before Hillel, and Hillel just accepts him and says, what is hateful to you, do not to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Very simple, yet very profound. If you were to stand on one foot, and this is a teaching I got from Danielle Hartman, right, you could imagine on one foot, you could recite the 10 Commandments, and you would be able to do that because they're not that long. Of all the things, and this is not a quote from the Torah itself, right? He comes up with a statement. It's short, to the point. And another important thing that's interesting about this, there's no mention of God in this statement at all, right? This is purely about human interaction and relationships with one another. The entirety of the Torah, according to Hillel, in this one statement is, do not do what is hateful to you, don't do to other people. And that's the entire Torah. The rest is commentary, not commentary in the more modern sense of how we use the idea of commentary. Usually when we say the rest is commentary, usually means it's trivial, not as important, extraneous. Here, what's really important is that it doesn't just end, the rest is commentary, period. The rest is commentary, go and learn it, or go study, as it is in the Aramaic, right? The rest is also very important, and you need to learn it. Similar to story number 1, where he taught him some basics and then said, now you have to trust me that there's a holistic world here that you have to explore. The same thing is happening here. The rest is commentary. Go and study it. But the distillation of the entire Torah is what is hateful to you, do not do unto others. This is in contrast to the golden rule, which comes out of Christianity, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or love your neighbor as yourself, right? An interesting thing. Why didn't Hillel use the phrase from Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself? Why not that? Why not one of the 10 commandments? So I want you to be thinking about that. Of course, there's no one right answer, but I think it's a very important statement. And what does it mean to use the negative here? What is hateful to you, don't do unto others. Does that deepen? Is this a deeper way of teaching us how we're supposed to interact with other people, as opposed to do unto others as you would want them to do unto you? Are you more drawn to the golden rule? Because most Jews even quote the golden rule and think it's a Jewish thing, when in fact it's not. So what we're going to talk about that a little. I am on one foot. I think here this is a much more complicated approach to human relationships. It's much easier and more idealistic to say, love your neighbor as yourself. It's too easy for us, number one, to get caught up in the word love and to recognize, as we all do, understand the complexity of this emotion called love. There is no commandment in the Torah, as you probably know, to love your parents. You are required to honor your parents, but our tradition doesn't go so far as to command love for our parents, and yet it does command in Leviticus 19 to love your neighbor. But what does that mean? It's very amorphous. It's very difficult. Here, this is putting the onus on you, I think, more so than just saying love your neighbor as yourself. Number one, there are a lot of us who, over the course of our lives, struggle with how we love ourselves and what does that mean. And then there is this idea that when it's framed like what is hateful to you, don't do it to your neighbor, you really have to think about what you are doing and how it will impact the other person, as opposed to just love, right? This is about, and I think this is also a critique of Shammai here. This is Hillel critiquing Shammai's approach, because Shammai just used a cubit, a builder's cubit, to hit this man, right? And you wouldn't, and even if he were to not want to convert this man, Shammai I'm speaking about, because of this ridiculous question, would he want to be beaten by someone else? No. And so instead of loving your neighbor as yourself, this is really saying, don't do to others what you would want done to you. Don't go and beat someone else. You wouldn't want that done to you. So I actually think this is a much deeper approach to human relationships and how we're supposed to interact with one another in a way that doesn't go as far with the golden rule itself. So I urge you to try and think about the Jewish golden rule more so than the Christian golden rule. Or if you want to debate this later on, I'd love to hear your different perspectives on this. But as I mentioned also, God is not mentioned here. This is really about the idea that our relationship with one another is primary. Our relationship with God is secondary. And that can be theologically problematic. But here Hillel is being pretty revolutionary with suggesting that God's not even in the picture. I had a chance to study this with Hartman, and he brought in the commentary from Rashi, a famous commentator who was also troubled by this and interpreted this verse in a way that brought God back in, because Rashi couldn't imagine Hillel not talking about God if he was going to distill the entire Torah into one statement. How could God not be there? Okay, so really, really deep and powerful text in just that one line, and really brilliant. Okay, and then finally the third story, which we're just going to go through quickly. Another non-Jew comes. He goes behind the Beit Midrash. He's hearing them study. They're learning about the garments that the high priests would wear, and temple times that are talked about in Exodus. And he says, "Oh, that sounds pretty amazing. For the high priest, I want to be a high priest. That would be pretty nice." So he goes before Shammai and says, "Make me a high priest." This is about someone who wants to join in a group or be a part of something purely for status, right? And here Shammai It has nothing, he doesn't want anything to do with that. He doesn't want someone who wants to be a part of something purely for status, an understandable belief. But then he goes before Hillel, who makes him a convert right away, right? And accepts him for who he is. Can any man be made king, but he who knows the arts of government, go and study. In other words, again, there is not one, even when Hillel talks about this one phrase, what is hateful to you, don't do unto others. He even says, he doesn't end there. Go learn the rest. The rest is commentary that you have to study and learn. He did that with the first one as well. All of this is about, you can't get caught up in the Twitter feed and the Facebook comments and the pithy statements that are made, and that those are supposed to represent in the entirety of an idea or a person. That we have to study individuals, we have to study ideas, we have to study issues. We can't get caught up in just the back and forth of those short statements. That is not the Jewish way to engage in dialogue and disagreement. You have to go study. If you want to make a comment about something, if you want to have an opinion, of course, everyone has an opinion, and Jews have extra opinions, but go and study what it is that you want to offer an opinion about. And therefore you will deepen your knowledge. And we all know this, but it's sometimes we need to be reminded of that, especially with leadership and all kinds of people around us who are just quick to make quick statements and assume that can cover all the bases. No, the world doesn't work that way. Let's not fall into that trap. And Hillel is reminding us, don't fall into that trap. Go and study, learn. We live in the golden age of information. We have access to anything and everything on the internet in a way that never existed before. So we should be taking advantage of that. We have lots of time at home. Let's use it wisely. Okay, so he goes on. This man then goes and learns the rules, and this idea that this is dangerous, the idea of high priest. And he learns through his own study that that's probably not the way, that he's not going to be the high priest. And therefore, he goes back to Hillel and says, Hillel, thank you for bringing me under the wings of the Shekhinah. All three of these men, these converts, come back together at some point together in one place. And they talk about Shammai's impatience sought to drive us from the world. That impatience and the inability to look beyond the quick statement leads to driving people further apart. And instead, Hillel's gentleness brought us under the wings of the Shekhinah. That's our goal. How can we meet each person where they're at? Which, by the way, I worked for Hillel, which is the Jewish organization on college campuses. I worked at Stanford, and then I worked at the University of Pennsylvania. One of the key things built into the framework of that organization is the idea of meeting people where they're at, meeting students where they're at. And it comes from this idea of Hillel, the rabbi from the Talmud, who recognized that in order to truly bring more people, not only into our tradition, but into a peaceful state of being, into relationships that can be meaningful and fruitful, we have to be gentle. And we have to fight so hard to do that these days. We have to bite our tongue a lot. We have a lot of reasons to want to use that builder's cubit with our words, or sometimes physically, whatever it may be. We see in this world and in our country the desire to use physical and verbal violence. But our tradition is saying, no, look beyond that. Can you pedagogically teach someone something? Can you spend enough time to be able to do that and maybe help people see things in a new way? Or can you at least go beyond the statements and try and ask some more questions, which is the theme that we've come to a lot over the course of our sessions together. So that's the text for this week. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any and all of it. So if you have comments, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand at this time, and we'll go from there. Okay, hi Jeff, how you doing?
Good, Rabbi. Thank you for calling me.
Yeah, of course.
And it's interesting if we look at these two men, Shammai and Hillel. And Hillel, for me, represents almost a modern level of the psychology and understanding of human beings. in the idea that he expressed in do not do what is hateful to you. This almost requires that he understood that man, in order to improve relationships with others, has to understand his biases, his weaknesses, as well as his strengths, and try not to be reactive, but proactive, and think through responses so that you don't propagate or repeat those acts of intolerance that are hateful to you. So that's
Wonderful.
a very modern way of looking at human behavior and understanding it. And that's the great difference, it seems, between the reactive Shammai and the proactive, thoughtful Hillel in his relationship to people, whether they're converts or not, and in their decision-making that is referenced in the Torah.
Wonderful. I love that. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, this idea that we have to be able to be introspective and understand our own biases, our own strengths, our own weaknesses, and that Hillel's statement, "What is hateful to you, don't do unto others," requires you to think, what is hateful to me? Like, how do I understand my place in the world and my relationship with it? And how have I taken enough time to do my own work, my own tshuva? So thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that. Hi, Claudia.
Hi.
Well,
It's actually my husband, Eddie, who has the question today.
Oh, hi, Eddie.
hi. So, I had always thought, I'm familiar with that, the one about, don't do what's hateful to yourself, to other people. I really had always thought that was a throwaway, and that the real answer to the question was what seemed like a throwaway, which comes after the comma, go and study. In other words, I had always thought that the essence of Judaism was study. It doesn't strike me that we have a canon where, the 10 Commandments really are somewhat limited in helping, live a religious life, not just a Jewish life. So I wonder if you see that this, like the first bit, as a bit of a judo move to throw off the stupid question in the first place and get to the heart, which is go and study. What we're doing now is the heart of Judaism. I really felt like what we're doing right now at this moment, this is what it means to be a Jew.
Yes, I think it's both. Thanks. It's a great point. I think both Hillel, just like he did in the first story, is figuring out a way to answer this man's question in a way that works with the way he asked it and expectations of this man, right? He really did want to figure out, can I answer this man in a way that he can hear me? Right. And that already goes to the idea in which we have discussions with one another. Are we talking over each other? We're not even speaking the same language. Or can you find a way to relate and respond to another person in a way that they can actually hear you? So I think you're right. I think there is part of this is a strategy that Hillel is using to teach this man. At the same time, it is a profound thing because he has distilled the entire Torah into one statement. And so therefore, I think the statement itself is also significant and profound. And also, as he does with all three of these stories, it really is about going and studying that's not enough. You can't ground your entire Jewish life on that one statement. There's a whole world. If you are going to live that out, if you are going to live out this one statement of what is hateful to you, don't do unto others, you have to understand how it is that you're supposed to live in the world, how you're supposed to treat other people, how you're supposed to relate to God, all of these things. So go and study is a key piece of it for sure. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a really good point. Susan, hello.
I was going to say the same thing, and that is the major point in Telushkin's, Rabbi Telushkin's book on Hillel, that you won't, if you don't study, you won't know how to not do to others what you don't want to yourself. One thing, I have a question though, with the third one, and I realize that the second is the most important, but I don't understand some of it with the whole the symbolism there of him not walking behind the sanctuary and and the like. Can you explain that?
Specifically about the beginning of that exchange of when he's walking
Less the
behind the bathing
beginning-
Josh.
Yeah, less the beginning, but about the stranger being put to death. And then he says, to whom it is applied, it's to King David, even to King David. Then the convert reasons, if Israel, who is the loved by the omnipresent, is going to happen to them, then the stranger that comes near shall be put to death. How much more a mere convert? So is he not converting because, but he does convert. Is he not converting because he's going to say, gee, I'm going to be put to death? I don't understand that.
Okay, great. Yeah, he does convert, and I think it's that the story is teaching him that he goes and he learns the details of the law of what it means to become a high priest, and the danger that comes with the priests, and the danger that is embedded in our tradition when you look at the laws of the relationship between God and the Jewish people, and that the high priest was a very specific role that basically there were only very few people with this God-given ability to be the high priest. And so this man learns, I think, humility. And it's also recognition that someone who's just coming in to a tradition can't assume that all of a sudden he can be the most powerful person in that tradition, or elevate himself or be elevated to the highest levels of that tradition or that hierarchy right away. That he recognizes his place in a broader landscape, and he understands what it means to be a part of this people where there are different roles to be played. And so I think it's mostly teaching us about this man who comes to realize that this goal of status that he initially had as his desire to come into this tradition changes once he starts to study the complexities of the laws of the tradition, and comes to realize that I can, that's not for me. That kind of status and that position is not for me. I'm just going to be who I am in this tradition. So that's my reading of it. So I hope that helps. Doug, great questions. Thank you, everyone. Hi, Doug. Doug, you want to ask questions? Should we come back to you? Maybe. We'll come back to you. Okay, Miriam. Hi, Miriam. Want to unmute and?
Trying to. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I love everything that you said. This is certainly one of my favorite expressions in the entire Tanakh, or perhaps in our entire Judaism, to not do unto others. And I've enjoyed listening to the responses. I think I would like to share another thought with you, because people often say, well, you see, Jesus was so positive. He said, do unto others. And Hillel was so negative. Do not look at it that way whatsoever, because Hillel was realistic. I want to add the word realism to everything else that we've done, because what he was interested in, the reality of living. Do not do to someone, whereas doing all the time often ends up, what is that sound you're listening to?
I don't know.
I don't know what that is. At any rate, doing very often ends up in not doing anything, because you're asked to do, to perform, to act. Whereas this way, you're asked something, and as you said, inquires and requires everything from you, and that is to not do. It is not negative. Not doing is a very positive state. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Miriam. Really appreciate that perspective. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Doug.
Hi, sorry, I wasn't looking at my screen and I pulled my earbuds, so I didn't hear you.
No problem.
Good afternoon, Rabbi. The most important thing that I have learned today is that in our current society, there is so much negative facts going around, particularly politically. And I get on Facebook and I get knee-jerk reactions to repost everything. And what I have learned is I better do some fact checking first before I do that. I've been called on posting incorrect facts before, and I guess I haven't learned. So it's going to slow me down a whole lot. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Doug. Thanks for being honest with your past failures and your attempt to improve yourself. Right? Yes, and you make a good point. There is a built-in pressure that comes with social media to the instantaneous response, the instantaneous repost, and it does take a lot of work for us to go deeper into past the headlines and past what people are posting to really understand. And it takes work. In other words, that the way, if we're moving into a world where we communicate almost as much, if not more, or over social media than we do in person, then just all that work that we've done over our lives to work on our interpersonal communication with people when they're face to face with us, we need to spend that same kind of time and energy and effort into how we engage with people on social media. And that can be really hard to do because the system is set up in a way to be just quick and responsive. And that's why emojis have also kind of taken over, that we try and distill even emotions into a graphic. So I think you're really bringing up a really important point for all of us to think about, Doug, is how do we engage and what do we do? How deep can you go into these posts before you post it yourself, because it does become an expression of who you are and how people judge you, whether we like it or not. It's as if we're now standing out in a protest or a group of people, and whatever you say on social media is as if you were saying it publicly in front of a group of people in a weird way. Okay, so thank you. I want to see if there were Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Rabbi. This is my first session with you, and boy,
Welcome.
Did I pick a good one? This is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
I was thinking about the contrast between the golden rule and Hillel's advice, and I thought about the two emotions of love and hate. And if you think about them, there is a much greater physiological effect, in my opinion, with the emotion of hate than love. When you love, I think your body relaxes, your blood pressure calms down, you get a really warm, good feeling throughout your body. But when you hate, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up. And I think that by focusing on, shall we say, eliminating hate, it opens the world for more love. If you're just focusing on loving your neighbor as yourself, you still leave the opportunity for hate. But if you could eliminate hate, it opens more opportunity for love to be spread around. And so it just seems to me that was sort of brilliant on Hillel's part to focus on and try to eliminate the emotions of hate. Thank you.
I love that. Tom, thank you. I hope you come back for future sessions and continue to give your insight. That was really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I see Burned. Hi, Burned. Burned, are you able to unmute? I can come back to you if not. Okay, we'll come back to you. David. Hi, David.
Hi, Rabbi. I joined you a little late. This is my first time in your group, and I've enjoyed this discussion about Hillel. I remember the story was that Shammai. Can you hear me?
You keep going in and out. You were saying, yep, hello?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I said that Shammai kicked him out of joining of when he approached Shammai for all of Torah on 1 foot, it was such a ridiculous request that how dare you ask me to stand on 1 foot and give off all the wisdom of our tradition, everything that I've lived my whole life for and worked for. Hello?
Yeah. Yeah. The
Hello?
beauty of Zoom, you keep going in and out.
I'm having a little problem with my connection here, but I said the effrontery that he felt, but Hillel took it differently. I felt that the way he said it was that what you do, which is offensive to me, which is right, the very action he's doing by saying stand on the foot, it's doing it. I'm wondering if he literally stood on 1 foot and said this. I like to make it like, okay, I'll give you the 1 foot answer, but if he was willing to do this in order to have him understand that you don't do what is offensive to people, because that's the beginning. That first, don't do this negative thing that you're even present. I think people aren't always at the highest level to love the other as you love yourself, because some of us have trouble even to love themselves, first of all, as well as to love others. That's a higher standard. It might be standard, but I think the first thing would be to not do unto others what you wouldn't want them to do unto you. That seems like that would have to be the first starting place for someone who doesn't understand this basic concept to begin with. And then to learn and to explore and study. And from there, he gets to a higher level. Hopefully one day you can love others as you love yourself, but that would be more an aspirational thing that you have to start at a more basic level.
Yes. Thank you, David, and thanks for coming. I hope you come back again as well. Thank you. Yes. What I love about this text is that Hillel's being realistic with how we work as humans, right? It's not a lofty goal of love your neighbor as yourself or do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. But it's really understanding that just like the learning that he does with the other converts, it's a step-by-step process, and you have to start somewhere. And let's start with something that's realistic, more realistic than ideological. Thank you. Okay, Bernd, I see that you are unmuted now. Hi.
Thank you. And I'm glad I joined. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay. I was going to say that Shammai and Hillel, of course, were part of the Sanhedrin. As a matter of fact, they were heads of the Sanhedrin at the time. And as I learned it, the Sanhedrin basically was like the parliament and had a lot to do with the laws of the country rather than with the theological part of the temple, where the priests were reigned, and they were already quite corrupt at the time. So that's something to take into account, that here's really an example of how the Jewish parliament or the need, or not the need, but the basis of Judaism, that every Jew is alike and therefore also alike under the law. And that's really what, to me, the third example is, where he asks if even the king comes or does something wrong, he's killed. And reminds me of what just happened this week, where our president was shown to not be above the law, even so he thought so. So you can see again how Judaism is modern.
Great. Thank you for making that connection. Yes. Thank you, Bernd. Yeah, both for reminding us about the Sanhedrin and the shift from priesthood to the Sanhedrin, but also the fact that these texts are so relevant even with the week's news, right? And how the more we can make those connections, I think the more responsibility we feel in this world, the more connection we feel to our tradition, and the more we recognize that the separation of our religious and theological identities with that of our secular lives does not have to exist. That separation doesn't have to exist in the same way. You can be a religious Jew even if you're a liberal Jew. You can be a learned Jew even if you don't know all of the written and the oral Torah. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I know that there were a bunch of comments, some long ones on the chat here. So I hope you all had the chance to look through this. some from Gary and Cindy. So I will look at them. I don't know if any of those people want to raise their hand and share any of these out loud. But there's some really, really good comments on there as well. Gary. Hi, Gary.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. I hope you don't mind. I'm writing progress notes on inpatience while listening to you. I focused on the golden rule because it's legalistic. And the golden rule, as said by Jesus, is beneficent. And Catholicism has spent a lot of time on that, medieval Catholicism. But not everything that is good to the recipient is necessarily good to the donor, and vice versa. So you can see that somebody might feel that they're doing good and yet do an act that universally would be deemed as violating your autonomy, or particularly autonomy. So non-maleficence, which is enshrined in the law and enshrined in medicine, that's universal. You don't do things that are harmful. You don't take a patient against his will and remove a tumor, even though you think removing the tumor can save the life. The person has the chance to decide. The question, I came up with a question though, because otherwise I would have kept quiet. The Hillel doctrine on what constitutes Judaism, it's a little bit problematic, because when you distill down an ethical system and a religious system to one point, then I don't know if that has any staying power across generations. There's others in our tradition who say, first you do, and then you understand. First you keep kosher, and then you understand why you keep kosher. First you do your daily prayers, and then you understand what is the meaning of prayer. Maybe that's got staying power over the generations. The lofty ethics is hard to transmit to kids.
Yes, it's a good point. And that is a debate in the Talmud between the rabbis of what's more important, to do or to study first. And they go back and forth on that. That is a really key challenge and debate that exists in our tradition. Yes, and as we talked about earlier, I don't think this statement is supposed to be the only thing. I think it does have staying power for some of the same reasons that you actually mentioned at the beginning of your comments. But I do think it's really important that what Hillel is saying is, this is the distilled version, but there's a lot more to it, and it's much more complex. And if you want to live by that statement of don't do what is hateful to you, don't do unto others, then you have a lot of learning still to do. And so I think it's yes, and it's both. I think it does have. I think we can't purely, of course, live by that one statement, and yet I think it does have a driving force that can be significant and profound over the course of generations, and it has. But that learning more in the complexity of our tradition is built into all three of the examples here. And I think built into our tradition, the way it presents itself to us is one in which you think you knew this, but there's more. Even the most learned rabbis continue to study. There's more and more and more. There's never enough. And that can both feel overwhelming, and at the same time, it can be very reassuring to know that there's still more you can learn. You're never at the end of that process. Okay, thank you, everyone. I see I can't tell if some of these people have their hands up again, but I want to I'm aware of time. It's 1:50. So please come back next week. We'll look at another text. I'm sorry we don't get to hear everyone's comments and everything you have to say, but my email is on the source sheet, so feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about any of this further. We can talk on Zoom one-on-one. Feel free to come back. I hope you come back, and thank you for those who it's your first time. Welcome. Welcome to the family, and I hope you come back to learn more Talmud with us in the next coming weeks. And again, wishing you all an early Shabbat Shalom and stay healthy. And again, let's live by Hillel, and let's continue to deepen our connection to one another and to our tradition. So thank you all very much, and have a great rest of the day.